What up, Wizards? It's the D and the Z. From Mtg, we like it a magic and wake up, sleepyhead. I made your favorite, some Innistrad Midnight Hunt spoilers today. And Wizards did not disappoint this Monday. They were like, dude, we took a day off from spoilers, but we're going to hit it hard today with some big stuff. Now today I'm going to switch it up and do things how I used to do them, which is to go through all of the limited and draft stuff first, like really quick, and then hit the most hyped cards of the day. And there's some really good ones to talk about. So let's go ahead and knock out these draft playables. So we'll start today with Voldaren Ambusher, 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 2/2 Vampire Archer. For some reason that seems like a weird combination of creature types, but I guess vampires get to be archers too, why not? When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, it deals X damage to up to one target creature or planeswalker, where X is the number of vampires you control. So another one of these where you have to make your opponent lose life, and then you have to control some number of vampires to actually make it kill a thing. But I'm pretty sure this is still really limited playable, especially if you can get it in multiples. But if you can't enable this, your opponent's lost life ability, then it's just a 3 mana 2/2, and that's not super good. But in terms of 3 mana kill that guy limited playables, I think Cut Purse Thief is just better. This is 2 and a black for a human rogue. It's a 2/1, and when it enters the battlefield, you destroy target creature you don't control that was dealt damage this turn, and it has Disturb 4 and a black. When you play its Disturb cost, you get a 2/2 spirit rogue with flying and death touch, and of course it's put into a graveyard from anywhere, you exile it. This looks like really sweet to me, not just because of the Disturb ability, which is quite good. Like, this thing has the ability to take out 2 creatures before it's all said and done, right? I mean, you do have to deal damage somehow to a creature, and sometimes that's not the easiest thing in the world, but, often when you swing with a bunch of creatures, your opponent will block with a bigger dude that'll stick around, especially in like mid and late game board states. So, by the time you hit turn 4, 5, 6 or whatever, in limited again, it's not really too hard to make sure that this thing actually takes out a relatively big guy. And then when it does die, it comes back to block in the air like any giant fatty your opponent has. So I actually think this is a really strong limited card. We also saw Defend the Celestus today, 4 mana, 2 and 2 green for an instant. Distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures you control. Well, it's 1 mana less than a Bounty of the Hunt, but you can't play it for free. I mean, of all of these like free spells and alliances, the only ones that actually saw a whole lot of play were Contagion and, of course, Force of Will. And I guess Pyrokinesis. It saw some play, too. But still, Bounty of the Hunt was one of the weakest cards in that cycle, and it's one of the most powerful cycles of all time. So that didn't see much play. I don't see this seeing much play 25 years later, to be quite honest with you. It's just 4 mana is a lot. I don't even know if I like this unlimited, to be honest. It's just kind of a card that exists. So let's look at another card that lets me talk about 25 years ago Magic. This is Immolation right here. This is just 1 red mana for an aura that enchants a creature, and that creature gets +2/-2. So this is a reprint from Legends, if I'm not mistaken. That is a 26-year-old set. This is the first time the card has ever been reprinted. Kind of a red dead weight. We call it the Red Dead Redemption. I don't think you're going to be playing this too much in your mono red decks, especially when you have access to just like better shock variants and stuff. But if there is a creature like, Seasoned Hallowblade or some other indestructible thing with low toughness that you absolutely can't otherwise kill in your red deck, this is probably a decent sideboard option. It's just cool to have this card back. And of course, you can put it on your own big guys, so long as they have 3 or more toughness, and they'll get bigger. Oh my goodness. I know you knew that, but I have to say, everything about a card, or the comment section will get on to me. Let's look at Turn the Earth, rather. This is just a single green mana for an instant. Choose up to 3 target cards in graveyards. The owners of those cards shuffle them into their libraries. You gain 2 life, and then you can flash back this card for 1 and a green. So this reminds me of Gia's Blessing. I get to keep talking about super old cards today, but this is not as good as Gia's Blessing, especially against the preponderance of mill decks in the format right now. So, I would have liked Blessing, but I'll take this. This is, I guess, sort of fine. What I like the most about this is that it's a kind of a life gain enabler if you're playing like a life gain deck. I'm not sure how good the card actually is. There are probably better life gain effects in your life gain deck, but still, this gains life twice reliably for relatively cheap and get you back cards that you might want. So there's kind of nothing wrong with that except for the opportunity cost. I don't know if you want to include this card in your deck in the first place, but if you do, it might do a couple of cool things for you, but I'm not sure how strong it actually is. Of course, at those rates, it might be actually a very strong card that there's like tricky stuff you can do with in older formats. So I just keep my eye on it, is all I'm saying. But let's move on to Hedge Witch's Mask. This is just a white mana for an artifact. It's an equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, and it can't be blocked by creatures with power 4 or greater. You equip it for 2. So yeah, you just slap this on a 3/3 that becomes a 4/4, and suddenly it can never die in combat. It's kind of interesting, you know. I do kind of like this, but again, I have a problem in terms of opportunity cost. I'm not sure that I want to include this in my Magic the Gathering deck when I could just play better cards. But let's look at Candlegrove Witch next, along with Ritual Garden and Celestus Sanctifier. Now, Candlegrove Witch kind of has a cool distinction because if I'm not mistaken, this is the very first mono-white warlock in Magic history, but that's about where the cool stuff stops. It's a 2-mana 2/2 for 1 and a white, and it's a human warlock. It has Coven at the beginning of combat on your turn. If you control at least 3 or more creatures with different power, Candlegrove Witch gains flying till end of turn. So that's all. It's a lot of creatures you got to have on your board to give this flying. No real relevant creature types. I guess human is, but not necessarily in standard yet. Human isn't. I mean, I guess you have Sigarda that boosts humans, but that's about it. I'm just not. It's not a good card. You probably play in limited where it's a decent curve filler, and if you're trying to do Coven stuff anyway, 2 mana for a 2/2 flyer is fine. So it's playable there. But Ritual Guardian is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 3/2 human soldier with Coven. At the beginning of combat on your turn, blah blah blah, it gains lifelink until end of turn. So, you know, 3 mana, 3/2 lifelink. If you have Coven, it will probably never really have Coven on the next turn that you swing with it, you know, after you play it. It's also a 3 mana 2 or 3/2, which I don't love, especially in a format with a common shock variant. I don't think you want to pay 3 mana for a 2 toughness creature, especially in this environment. And I'm pretty much always squeamish about 3 mana 2 toughness creatures in limited. So I'm just not impressed by the 3/2 stat line. This could be better. So let's move on to Celestus Sanctifier. 3 mana for a 3/2. Oh boy, it's a human cleric. At least it's got some cool creature types. If it's neither day nor night, it becomes day as Sanctifier enters the battlefield. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your graveyard. You don't get one of them. You just get to put one into your graveyard. And you have to. But you must put one of them into your graveyard. So that's, you know, I don't know. You kind of get like a sort of a white version of Surveil here. Although I guess this is just exactly Surveil. But you get to look at 2 cards instead of 1. So I don't know. This is probably better than I think in limited to get you churning through your deck and all that. And it's a day-night enabler, which you might need in limited, especially at the common level like this is. So this could be bread and butter, but again, I just do not trust a 3/2 stat line for 3 mana. So let's look at Burleybreaker. That's actually the name of the card here. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 green for a 6/5 human werewolf with Ward 1. A lot of Ward going around in this set, but you can flip that over because the card is daybound. So if it becomes night, it becomes a Dire Strain Demolisher. This is an 8/7 werewolf with Ward 3. It's still not worth it though. I know it looks great. In limited, this is probably fine. 5 mana for a 6/5 Ward 1 is like an amazing stat line in limited. And the stats only get bigger from there and the card gets harder to kill. But, you know, in standard, there's better things for 5 mana and it's just stats. There's no trample, there's no evasion and blah. You know that's bad in standard. But in limited, this is probably a pretty sweet top-end, like, curve filler for any of your aggressive green decks and beyond. It's just a sweet card in terms of stats. It's going to be tough to beat a 6/5 for 5 mana at this rarity. So let's look at Chaplain of Alms here. I think this is a pretty cool card. Just 1 white mana for a 1/1 human cleric with first strike and Ward 1, and you can disturb it for 3 and a white if it's in your graveyard. When you do disturb it, it's a 2/1 flying first strike. Each creature you control has Ward 1. If it would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So this is 1 mana. That's not bad. They just like kept piling stuff onto it too. Like, what if it had a relevant creature type, like human and cleric, right? Because people are doing party decks, and clerics is a deck unto itself that's losing a good 1-drop in Speaker of the Heavens. So need to make sure clerics has good 1-drops. Let's make it let's give it first strike. Sure, let's give it first strike. You can take out like Prosperous Innkeepers and stuff like that in combat and all kinds of other mess. That's not bad. And let's give it Ward 1, just in case your opponent tries to get rid of it. They're incentivized to pay more mana. And then let's make the disturb cost like relatively low. And when you disturb it, it's a flying first strike with 2 power. And then it's like a Ward Anthem effect. Like, they just kept throwing stuff onto this card. I'm still not sure that this is really, truly constructed playable, to be honest with you. But it's a pretty good start. I mean, if you want to look at it this way, it's kind of a 1 mana 2/1 flying first strike, but it's not that because you have to pay 4 mana for the disturb costs. So I guess you're kind of looking at this like a 5 mana flying 2/1 flying first strike, which is not as good. But, you know, just a decent 2/1 or a decent 1-drop with first strike that can face down a fair number of early creatures in this format. And live, for that matter. That's difficult to get rid of, comes back, and makes everything else difficult to get rid of. You know, like, I don't know. It's really not terrible. I'm not sure how much I want to put this in mono white decks over like Monk of the Open Hand or something like that, but it's at least an interesting call that gives you some sort of like late game, you know, gas after a sweeper and evasion to boot. It's not bad. So let's check out Loyal Griff. You know, in that reprints that I want in Innistrad thing, I almost had Griff's Boon. I almost used Griff's Boon for that video because I missed that card. So instead of getting Griff's Boon, they gave us the whole Griff here. It's 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 2/2 Hippogriff with flash and flying. And when it ETBs, you may return another target creature you control to its owner's hand. So this is a May ability, and that's great. Like, if you don't use the ability, then it's just a much better Windrake. You know, 3 mana, 2/2 flyer. Those are always good in Limited, or at least they're mostly good in Limited. The moment we get a 3 mana 2/3 flyer in Limited, it's on. It really is. But in any case, these 3 mana 2/2 flyers are always decently playable in Limited. And in this case, you get flash as gravy. You might get to save one of your important creatures. Again, just as gravy. Like, the stat line is good enough in Limited, but you got all this like cool value stapled onto it. So I think you should play as many copies of these as you draft. Speaking of 2-power flash flyers, we also saw Nibblegast Intruder today. This is actually really like cool art to me, but it's 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 2/1 spirit with flash and flying. When it ETBs, up to 1 target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-0 till end of turn. So you flash this in, and you target their 2-power guy that's attacking, and you just block with this. So as long as they're attacking with like a 2/2 or 3/2 or something. Well, I guess if they're attacking with a 3/2, it still kills your Nibblegast Intruder. But I still think this is a pretty playable card. I mean, 3 mana, 2 power, flyer, I've already established. Those are pretty decent. Plus, you get the flash as gravy. And again, extra sauce. You know, you might be able to neuter an opponent's attack or something. It's, again, like, is this a common or an uncommon? Okay, it is an uncommon. I was going to say, this is common, but it's not. Still, this is one of those cards. I should be careful with this phrase, that you want to draft like as many copies as you get. Now, of course, don't draft 4 copies of it and play all of them. But if you just naturally get 2 copies of this card, I'm pretty sure you're happy in your blue deck. But let's look at dawnhart Wardens next. This is 3 mana, 1 a green and a white for a 3/3 human warlock with vigilance. Coven. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 3 or more creatures with different power, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. Now, I want to point this out specifically because I don't know how good this is for Standard, but I think that it is a massive signpost for Limited, and you need to take notice that this card exists, because if you're building like the green-white tokens, the green-white Coven deck in Limited, this is the card you're looking to get. Like, this is the uncommon you want, like as many copies of as possible, and I mean it this time. You get 4 copies of this, play them. 3 mana, 3/3 vigilance isn't terrible on its own, especially in Limited. Those are fantastic stats. And if you can get the Coven, then this is fantastic. The Coven ability. Also note that it doesn't appear to say in this translation, other creatures you control get +1/+0. It's everything. So this will swing as a 4/3 if you have Coven. And when you do have Coven and you swing, you're getting at least +3/+0 in power, because you have to have 3 creatures to activate Coven, or to trigger Coven, if you want to use the right word. But sometimes this will give +4/+0, +5/+0 as a bonus, and that's really good, especially if you do have a board full of tokens or whatever. You've gone relatively wide. I just like this card. I don't expect it to see a whole lot of Standard play. I don't think it's quite there, but when we build like green-white tokens on stream, we're playing all 4 copies. But up next, here's Geistpatrician here. This is 2 and a blue for a 2/2 Spirit Knight with flying. Other spirits you control get +1/+1. Spells that you cast from your graveyard cost 1 less to cast. What a sweet card. Only problem is I still don't think this is good enough. I sound super critical today, I know, but you know, if you're going to play this in like modern spirits or something, it really ought to have flash. It doesn't have flash. If you're going to play it in standard spirits, you probably also want it to have flash, and it doesn't have that. It just dies to shock variants and frostbite and dragon's fire and power word kill and like a bunch of other stuff. So I don't know about this one. I really want to like this card. It's an anthem effect. And it makes flashback cost less. It makes disturb cost less. It makes like escape cost less. Like that seems really, really powerful. But 3 mana is a lot to pay in standard for a 3 mana for a 2/2 flyer. In limited, it's a fine rate, especially when it comes on a common or an uncommon. But you know, you have here a rare, probably just so it doesn't destroy limited. I don't know. This has enough cool text to be a rare. Don't get me wrong, but I just wish I was a little bit more impressed by this. You know, we're looking at this specifically in competitive formats, and I don't think it quite makes the cut. But again, we play spirits on stream. The card's going in the deck. But let's look at Auger of Autumn here. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 green for a 2/3 human druid. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play lands from the top of your library. It also has Coven. As long as you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. All right, so it's a mashup. It's Courser of Kruphix, but it's also Vizier of the Menagerie, or like any of these play creatures from the top of your library effects. We've seen plenty of them in just standard recently. And they tend to be reasonably strong at times. But I think that in standard, Coven is going to be a little tough some of the time to activate, and this guy's like pretty fragile. I know people hate when I say that things die, but it's just the reality of standard. It dies to Frostbite, it dies to Dragonfire, dies to Power Word Kill, dies to every played removal spell. Not that it dies to removal. I understand that's a bad argument. It dies to every played removal spell in the format. That's a different thing, if you'll notice. So I know that it gets old when people say dies to removal, but I try to review cards as like objectively as possible, and I think in this case that I am not necessarily being like cynical. I am being pragmatic. I know that the Magic r/Magic TCG subreddit is just freaking out about this card. If you go on Spikes, though, they're a little bit more realistic. I'm more in line with the way they think about the card. It dies to removal. It's kind of slow. Coven is difficult to activate. It's not Courser of Kruphix because it doesn't have 4 toughness. It doesn't gain any life, right? So it's not Vizier of the Menagerie because Vizier was always turned on. You don't have to have a bunch of creatures to turn it on. You know, it seems like it should help its own ability. Play creatures off the top of your library. That activates Coven. And then you can play creatures off the top of your library? No, you can't. You can't play creatures off the top of your library until you've actually hit Coven. And at that point, I guess it still helps you keep Coven in place. I mean, that's kind of cool. You know, this like green experimental frenzy thing they've been trying out with like the 5-mana Vivian and a couple of other cards lately is something that I like. You know, Rangers class does the same thing. I think it's really cool, like space and a way to quote unquote draw cards in green without actually putting them into your hand. But as far as this particular creature goes, I don't think this is quite as there as we want it to be. I'm not going to be fooled by Realm Walker again, even though I think this is like objectively better than Realm Walker in a lot of ways. I still, the turn that you play it, you're not going to be able to play the land off the top of your library a lot of the time. Actually, that's pretty bad when you think about it. Like, if you already have land in your hand, if you need land, it's going to be sweet to drop this on turn 3 and be like, okay, there's a land on top. Whoosh, I get a land next turn. But if you drop it on 3 and you don't have any other lands in your hand, and you look at the top card of your library and it's not a land, you're going to be like, ooh, I needed that land to do literally anything next turn. Conversely, if you do have lands in your hand already, you're going to look at the top card of your library when you play this on 3 and be like, crap, I'm drawing a land next turn. That could be a little demoralizing. And that's not this card's fault. I'm just saying that will happen a few times when you play this card and it's going to feel really bad. But ultimately, I want the card to be a smidge better, just a tiny bit better. You know, even though standard's powering down a good bit, we're losing a Choreo, we're losing Throne of Eldraine and all that. I still don't think that even in a powered down standard, this is quite where we want to be, although it looks very close. But now we're getting into the biggest stuff of the day. Here's Lyessa, Forgotten Archangel. This is 2 white and a black for a 4/4 legendary angel with flying and lifelink. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. If a creature an opponent controls would die, though, you exile it. So this card is sweet. I probably have the most positive things to say about this card so far. I know you're probably getting sick of me just pooping on everything. That's what it feels like. But that's what happens when we go through like the draft stuff and the bad rares first. So now we're getting into the good stuff, and I think this is like legitimately D's. I will say, I put out a Twitter poll on this card yesterday where I gave a bunch of options, you know, like, is this card tech against Goldspan Dragon, which was the most chosen answer, a worse Baneslayer. Now, what I meant by a worse Baneslayer is, hey, Baneslayer wasn't an answer to Goldspan Dragon. How is this an answer to Goldspan Dragon if Baneslayer wasn't? But the other one was a worse option in the 5-drop slot than 5-mana Kaya, right? And then I believe the fourth option was a sick combo with Linvala, which is a dope interaction. Esper Angels might be worth it, just because, you can sacrifice your Linvala to make everything hexproof or indestructible. And then Linvala pops back to your hand. You just play it and do it again. That seems great. That seems like a really difficult interaction to actually deal with. So I am excited about that combo. But I want to say that we did just have Baneslayer in the format, and it never did anything. It never did anything at all. So if it wasn't tech against Goldspan, I don't know that this is, but this is probably just a more playable card than Goldspan Dragon. Or, not Goldspan, not at all. It's probably a more playable card than Baneslayer Angel, I mean to say. On a lot of different axes, right? Just look at this text box. Like, it's got the flying, it's got the lifelink. It does stand up to a Goldspan Dragon really well, gain you the life back. It's going to be great. But aside from that, you also get back, whatever creatures die. It feels like a Nightmare Shepherd or like Kaya's Ghost Form counters. In a way, I could see this competing with Kaya for that 5-drop slot. It may be not as worse than Kaya as we think it is. Right? This can actually end the game in a few bites, or at least put the game well out of reach because of the lifelink. The evasion helps it get through too. It's just a pretty sweet card. And Brick Walls aggro like crazy, but again, so did Baneslayer Angel. Right, so where the value in this card really lies is not necessarily the stat line, although I do think the stat line is fine for what you're paying. It's just the fact that the text box is so insanely powerful, First of all, creatures your opponent controls, when they die, they exile. Like, that's kind of really good just in and of itself. But again, the ability to basically have like ghost form counters on all of your dudes is quite good. And if you do play this in the same deck with Kaya, I know they compete for the 5-drop slot, but if you go like a 2-2 split because they're both legendary, that makes sense, right? So if you have a Kaya out and you put a ghost form counter on this, that's kind of like putting a ghost form counter on all of your creatures in a way, because this makes it to where all of your creatures will pop back to your hand when they die. So you just have to protect it. You just put the ghost form counter on it. If it dies, it pops back to your hand. You get the stipulations set in place again. So I don't know. There's some really sweet stuff about this card. I like it in like Blood on the Snow decks, but again, it competes with Kaya for a slot in those decks. But it could easily be a 1 or 2 of, because you get this back with Blood on the Snow, and not only does it kill your opponent in a few swings, but it also puts them in kind of a sticky situation, depending on what else you've got going on. So I'm a big fan of this. I haven't even mentioned Black White Angels. It probably goes in Black White Angels, like maybe a 2-2 or a 3-1 split with Rampage of the Valkyries, because I think that deck still wants to play Rampage. And you probably don't want 4 copies of this. We're already playing 4 copies of Rampage, so maybe, again, you do like 2 or 3 copies of this and 1 or 2 copies of Rampage. It's still a great card. And I will say this, the Black White Angels decks really use a lot of tokens, don't they? Like Furhaw's Retribution and Rampage and stuff. So, maybe this card's not as good in those decks as I want it to be, but I still think, Starnheim Unleashed also tokens. Emiria's Call, tokens. So yeah, maybe the card's not as good as I wanted to be in Angels, but getting back a Righteous Valkyrie seems good enough a lot of the time. Like making sure you always have that card. So I don't know. Card's really sweet. I don't actually know if this ends up seeing much standard play because of the casting cost being a little bit steep for what this actually does. But all things considered, it's a really, really sweet card that we're definitely going to try to make work, if nothing else. I like it a lot. But here's another flyer that I really like today. This is Moonveil Regent. 4 mana, 3 and a red for a 4/4 dragon with flying. Whenever you cast a spell, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw a card for each of that spell's colors. When Moonveil Regent dies, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of colors among permanents you control. Alright, so I need to go ahead and say Tiamat, because that's the obvious thing, right? I mean, if you have a Tiamat out, you can go search this up. That's kind of cool. And then if it dies, you get to brain something for 5. Seems all right. The card is just all around like great in a lot of ways. This can be like after you play your Tiamat, this can be like the last dragon you cast from your hand, and you discard what's left in your hand and go draw a bunch of cards. Seems okay, right? But those are the obvious things. Okay, what I like about this is putting in like a 1 or 2 color deck. I don't think you have to force 5 colors with this. I really don't. Like, if you put it in Izzet Dragons, here's the push-pull with Izzet Dragons. I'm not sure how much you're going to want to discard your hand every time you cast a spell, but if you do go Hellbent, then like Expressive Iteration draws you 2 cards, which is great. It's really, really good, but you know, maybe in like a mono red deck, this is actually like an experimental frenzy, and we just don't realize it. You know, like in mono red, you play this, you go Hellbent really easily in mono red, go into top deck mode. Super easily, no cards left in your hand. So if you're in that situation, then everything that you cast effectively lets you just draw 1 card if it's a single color. Note too that you can play things like Blade Historian in your deck, in your mono red deck, and draw 2 cards when you're Hellbent. When you play that, that seems good. You'll also have a flyer that does 6 damage when you play your actually does 8 damage when you play your Blade Historian. The card doesn't die to Frostbite. The card doesn't die to most Dragon's Fire. The card doesn't die to Power Word Kill. The card doesn't die to Shadow's Verdict. See, when cards do die to a bunch of removal, I point that out. But when cards don't die to a bunch of removal, I like to point that out too. I think it's important. There's just a lot of cool things about this card. It's a decently statted, easy to cast in that it's like very easily splashed into 5 and 4 and 3 color decks. I think the card gets a little bit better once we get the gangster set. That's going to have like, you know, the wedges in it, 3 color, you know, guilds basically. And so once we get the mana and the cards that set brings, I think this card gets a little bit better. There's just a lot that I like about this. Like if you can't tell, I'm really kind of advocating hard for this card when I've spent most of the video just crapping on everything. So I like this card more than I think a lot of people do, and I think there's a reason for it. The card looks pretty stiff. I guess I should probably bring up Grafted Identity. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue for an aura. As an additional cost to cast it, you sack a creature, it enchants a creature, and you control that creature. It also gets +1/+1. Not the creature you sacrifice, the creature you control. So it's control magic. This is a control magic, effectively. I keep saying they're never going to reprint that card, but they get closer and closer, like every single year. I actually don't think control magic would be like that bad of a reprint. I don't. These thief effects aren't as good as they used to be. They used to just be the most annoying thing in the world. But with this one specifically, you have to go down in terms of board presence to make this a playable card, to play it in the first place. You know, and that kind of sucks. But I guess we've got Eye Twitch, Shambling Ghast, and all kinds of other like sacrificable creatures in a blue-black shell right now. So this isn't bad. This isn't bad, and now we get to play even more of our opponent's deck, you know? Mind Flayer in Standard, and a couple of other things that let you steal your opponent's junk, but now we have even more of those cards. This is just a much better, like, I don't know, Tempted by the Auric in a lot of situations. So I'm interested in the card. I've always been a big fan of Control Magic, as long as I'm playing against it, or as long as I'm playing with it, rather. If I'm playing against it, I hate it. It's the most annoying card that they ever printed. Why did they do that? But if I'm playing with it, I love it. So I usually love these Control Magic variants that get printed. This one's no different. I'm not sure how much play it sees, but it's a cool card. But now we have reached the Adversary cycle, and these are the last few cards we'll talk about today because they're unbelievably powerful. Each and every one of these looks very playable to me, but we'll start with Spectral Adversary. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 spirit with flash and flying. And when it ETBs, you may pay 1 and a blue any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on Adversary, then up to that many other target artifacts, creatures, and or enchantments phase out. All right, so I chose to talk about this one first, but don't let that make you think that it's like the weakest one of the cycle we've seen so far. I actually expect this one to see the most play in like older formats because it can go into the Modern Spirits deck and be pretty good. Pretty good. Now, at its floor, it's a 2 mana, 2/1 flash flying, which aren't the best stats in the world, but the moment you can pump 4 mana into it, throw it down at the end of your opponent's turn and phase out even 1 important blocker, that's very good for the Spirits deck. And don't sit here and tell me you can't get to 6 mana in Modern. I've played some games of Modern in my life, and I know that a lot of people think that Modern is just this format where like you get to turn 3 or 4 and the game's just over. And it's not necessarily. I played plenty of games of Modern that went to turn 15. So like it's entirely possible to draw the game out, especially in your, well, it's a tempo deck. I was going to say in your control deck, but Spirits is a tempo deck. You want the game to end relatively fast. But, you know, if you get to phase out 2 things with this, I'm pretty sure your opponent's just grilled, you know. But for the most part, you play this turn 4 end step and you phase 1 important blocker out, I'm pretty sure it's Dunsky. So I like the card. I really like the card for the Modern Spirits deck. I think that it makes the cut in that deck. But if, even if it doesn't there, it's still a really powerful card, even in a format like Standard and even outside of a Spirits deck. Just in a mono blue tempo or flash deck or something is a really good option. You can flash it in to block something early. You can flash it in to attack early if that's what you want to do. You can flash it in on turn 4 or 5 and make sure that your opponent's elite spellbinder can't block all your flyers. There's just a lot you can do with this card, whether you're playing tribal or not, and it scales intensely well, and the value that it gives you off of scaling may not last forever, but it may not need to. I didn't even mention this. If you pump 4 mana into this guy, and it's a 3/3, and that's like great. You pump 6 mana into the guy, he's a 4/4. That is also great. I love that all of these adversaries get bigger as you pump mana into them, and it's not just like, here's more of an ETB trigger. Like, no, it actually makes the creature itself better too. So that's really sweet. Like here on Tainted Adversary, it does that same thing. Also, it has really cool art. I don't know why I like this art so much. You put a hat on a zombie, I'm a sucker for that. But anyway, it's 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 2/3 zombie with Death Touch. Look at those stats. 2 mana, 2/3 Death Touch? Like, I'm already kind of in. Especially with the relevant creature type. But when it ETBs, you may pay 2 and a black any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on Adversary, then create that many 2/2 black zombie creature tokens with Decayed. Did I say create that many zombie tokens? Actually, you create twice that many zombie tokens. I'm actually not sure if I said twice that many or not in the reading. I forgot, so I had to just do this. But yeah, you create twice as many 2/2s as you put counters on him. That's great. Just a 2 mana 2/3 Death Touch. I've already said this. That's good enough, especially in your zombie deck that we're looking for decent 2-drops for. All day. I'll take that. And like, this goes well beyond tribal zombies, but especially in tribal zombies, the ability to put like 3 zombie bodies on the battlefield on turn 5 is probably good enough, And the card just, like, even again, outside of zombies, 5 mana for, oh my god, what is it? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 power. 5 mana for 7 power. That beats Mascot Exhibition, in terms of rate at least. When you pump 8 mana into this, and people have said that's impossible, no, it's not. There's not only, again, just like Modern, Standard tends to go even longer than Modern. I've gone to turn 15 in Standard over and over recently, so it's not too hard to get all the lands in the world out and top deck this and just do something nutso banana bread with it, right? But, 8 mana, not hard with Treasure in the format, and that is a thing that's in the format. Conveniently. So 8 mana is not really as hard as you think to get to. And once you do get to 8 mana, what do you get? 4 zombies and a 4 power guy? Yeah, it's not 4. Wait, that's 12? Yeah, it's 12 power on the battlefield for 8 mana. It definitely beats Mascot Exhibition. So, and and it fulfills any, creatures entering the battlefield triggers that you might have. It fulfills any, going wide needs that you might have. You top deck this late in the game and pay 5 mana for it. That's 8 power on the battlefield your opponent has to deal with post sweeper. It's just, all of these. I'm going to say this about all of these, but these scale like probably better than most cards that we've ever seen, like Hydroid Krasis levels of scaling on these things. But the decent part of all of them is that they are fairly statted, relatively good on rate, even if you don't kick them. And I just love this cycle. I am very much in love with this cycle, if you can't tell. But there's another creature we got to see today from this cycle that I think is even better than this. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a look at Fearless Adversary. This is 1 and a white for a 3/1 human scout with lifelink. And when it ETBs, you may pay 1 and a white any number of times. Put that many courage counters on Adversary. Creatures you control get +1/+1 for each courage counter on Fearless Adversary. This is great. I mean, I will say there are some things in the format right now that make me not love a 2 mana 3/1 lifelink. Just for that rate. Again, Eye Twitch, Shambling Ghast, Prosperous Innkeeper, Jasperis Sentinel, these are all really commonly played 1-drops, not to mention mono white and mono red 1-drops that we see a lot of too. So, the idea that you might get through with your 3/1 lifelink in the early game, not as possible as you might think. Let me put it that way. But if your opponent does have a naked board or you're on the play, then this is probably again, at least pretty decent. If you do have to trade it in combat, at least you gain some life too. So that's not bad. You know, against aggro, it seems like it just dies. It attacks, gets blocked, and died. But you'll need that life. It's a great blocker against some of your opponent's aggro creatures. So there's some good things I like just about the 2 mana stat line on this. But once you pay 4 mana for it, not only do you get a 4/2 lifelinker, but all your other creatures get an anthem. If you pay 6 mana for it, all your creatures get a double anthem. That's just super sick. And you get a 5/3 lifelink too. That's pretty good for 6 mana. So again, this thing just scales perfectly. Goes really well in the mono white aggro deck. I think I'll try this instead of Loyal Warhound. I'm pretty sure that mono white wants another anthem effect outside of just paladin class. And this is a pretty good ticket. It comes on a body. It's got the lifelink, you know, decently statted body to begin with. It just gets out of control as the game goes on. Just a sick little body right here that I really like a lot. I think this is easily the best card of the day, probably for standard, but all of this adversary cycle looks unbelievably good so far, and I can't wait to see the other two. But got a bonus card here. I just reloaded Mythic Spoiler. And there's a new thing. It's called Briar Bridge Tracker, and I have not read it yet. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 2/3 human scout with vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, investigate. As long as you control a token of any kind, apparently, Tracker gets +2/+0. So it's basically a 3 mana 4/3 vigilance, which is fine stats. I guess it dies to Frostbite and Dragon's Fire and stuff, but like that's still pretty fat stat line. Anytime you approach 4 power for 3 mana, I'm kind of into it. So I like that, and the fact that it ETBs and investigates is great. This is obviously a callback to Tireless Tracker, except I guess this tracker gets tired. Just 1 clue token, that's it. Come on, and you're done after that. I guess you can flicker it, like blink it and stuff, and get another clue token. All things considered, though, I think this is probably decent. I'm not sure if it's playable. It does compete with like Kazandu Mammoth and a couple of other important 3-drops, like Old Growth Troll in green. But Old Growth Troll is a 3 mana 4/4 with trample. I guess the actual good part about that card is that it comes back after it dies and ramps you and stuff. But this doesn't have that going for it, but it has similar stats and is way easier to cast than an Old Growth Troll. So you're not really losing much if you decide to incorporate this rather than OGT. So it's not actually that much worse than Old Growth Troll, and the investigate, the clue token is great in like, you know, your sort of mid-range green decks. I love how splashable it is too. It's very easy to cast. So in like 2 and 3 mana decks, this is probably at least a decent 3-drop, but I'm not sure it gives you the value that you actually need for it to be a good card or even worthy of comparing to Tire Tracks for that matter. Tireless Tracker is just an unbelievable, fantastic, all the words that I commonly use, ridiculous, magic card. And I'm not sure this quite approaches that level, but it's very good. I think it's a very solid magic card. I think solid's a good word for it. But we made it. Again, we made it through the forest together. This was all of the Midnight Hunt spoilers for this afternoon, but there's going to be a few more tomorrow. We're at about the halfway point. Not quite the halfway point of this spoiler season, and we have already seen some pretty good stuff. Anybody that was worried about sort of the lower-ish power level of this set, I wouldn't be too worried if we keep seeing stuff like the Adversary cycle. And we've seen some pretty good rares outside of that too, like some really playable stuff. So with half the set left to spoil, I'm pretty sure we're going to get even more really cool stuff. I'm excited for this set so far. I think it's like really hitting a decent mark in terms of flavor, especially. Some of the flavor is just off the charts in this set. But again, playability, how excited I am to play with some of these janky build-arounds, how excited I am to play with some of these obvious, like, solid role-playing cards. There's a lot to, like, look into so far when it comes to this set and get excited about. So let me know how you feel about it so far and all the cards we talked about today. Do you think the Adversary cycle looks too good? Do you think that it's actually an overrated cycle? Let me know down there in the comments how you felt about everything. And do all of this stuff. If you feel like it, come watch us on Twitch. If you want to see all the cards from the weekend, I think there were 5 or 6 this weekend. If you want to see me review all the cards from the weekend, go to twitch.tv/sbmtgdev, link in the description, and check out our latest VOD, because that's where I talk about those cards. I also talk about the cards that I'm most interested in playing so far from the set. So if that sounds cool to you, check that out. You can check out the Patreon, $1 a month to support the channel and pick what decks we do first for Midnight Hunt Standard. Aside from that, follow me on Twitter and like and subscribe. Make sure you sub, because I need those. there's nothing in it for you. That's not true. You get notified whenever I put videos out, which is pretty important during spoiler season. So hit me with the sub sandwich, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.